Welcome back to Royal Vault UK, the place where we explore the quiet corridors, the dutiful rituals, and the hidden turning points of the British royal family. Tonight, we step inside Buckingham Palace at a moment when calm tradition meets an unexpected command. King Charles has issued a final order. It is measured, formal, and delivered behind closed doors, yet its echo spreads beyond the palace gates. Within the royal household, the message lands like a soft but undeniable bell, summoning every duty, every loyalty, and every doubt. Outside, across Britain, the announcement ripples through a divided public, stirring old questions about continuity, change, and the meaning of the crown in a restless age. At the heart of this story stands the king, steadfast and deliberate, confronting the weight of legacy. Around him, figures long bound to service find themselves caught between silence and conviction. In the days that follow, whispers grow into arguments, and arguments become a national reckoning. Was this the act of a sovereign securing the future, or the opening move in a struggle that will test the monarchy itself? The corridors of Buckingham Palace have always been places of quiet routine, polished floors, clipped footsteps, and voices lowered in reverence to tradition. Yet in recent months, that silence has carried an unusual weight. Staff members speak carefully. Courtiers avoid direct questions, and behind every polite smile lies the same uneasy thought. The crown is preparing for something. Since ascending the throne, King Charles has carried two burdens, one public, one private. Publicly, he must modernize a 1,000-year-old institution for a generation that no longer worships crowns. Privately, he faces time itself, the awareness that his reign began late, and that his legacy will be measured not in decades, but in decisive moments. Rumors began to swirl after a series of closed-door meetings between the king, senior advisors, and the Privy Council. The agenda was never released, but leaks spoke of streamlining the monarchy, redefining royal duties, and finalizing succession logistics. Those phrases may sound procedural, but within palace walls, every word carries history and consequence. For months, cameras captured small hints of strain. The king's unusually terse exchanges with aides, the Queen Consort's guarded expressions during public engagements, and the rare absence of Prince William from private royal gatherings. To the outside world, it was business as usual. Inside, the air was charged. One source close to the household described it bluntly. The king feels the clock ticking. He wants to leave the House of Windsor in perfect order, no more confusion, no more competing voices. This is his way of ensuring clarity before it's too late. When the final order was quietly drafted, it wasn't accompanied by ceremony. There was no televised address, no statement from the palace press office. It was sent through private channels official, but sealed to key members of the royal household. Those who received it understood immediately that this was not a routine directive. It was the king's personal decree, signed by his own hand, marked with his private insignia, and carrying a phrase that has since become legend inside the palace. This shall stand as the final command of my reign's intent. Within hours, the quiet order began to divide opinions not only within the monarchy, but across the nation itself. No one outside the inner circle saw the document in full. Even among senior royals, access was restricted to a handful of trusted figures, the Queen, the Prince of Wales, and Princess Anne. Yet fragments of its contents began to surface through careful leaks. Whispers carried from corridors to journalists who understood how to listen between the lines. According to multiple palace sources, the final order addressed three pillars of royal power: succession, duty, and public image. In just a few pages, it reshaped how the monarchy would move forward after Charles, and how it would be remembered under his reign. The first directive, though worded formally, was unmistakable in intent. Prince William would assume the king's ceremonial duties earlier than expected, not as regent, not as successor, but as a visible, active presence meant to embody continuity and stability in the face of transition. In simpler terms, Charles was quietly preparing Britain for a future without him, without ever saying the words aloud. This move alone sent tremors through the palace. For decades, transitions in the monarchy were handled by nature, not by design. But Charles had lived his entire life waiting for the throne he knew better than anyone, the burden of waiting too long. He would not repeat that pattern with his son. The second clause struck even closer to home. It detailed a restructuring of royal patronages, redistributing dozens of long-standing responsibilities. The king's wish was clear: to reduce the public roles of certain extended family members and centralize power around what he called the core four himself: Queen Camilla, Prince William, and Princess Catherine. For some, this was a necessary modernization. For others, it was a quiet exile. Those left outside that inner circle, including Prince Andrew and Prince Harry, would see their remaining royal privileges honorably concluded at the discretion of the crown. The language was polite, but the message was final. Then came the third and most controversial section. The king's final order reportedly instructed the palace's communications team to maintain transparency regarding the health of the sovereign, a direct challenge to generations of royal secrecy. "The public has a right to know the truth of its king," the letter stated. "The age of silence must yield to the age of trust." Within hours of this line being shared among staff, confusion turned to debate. Some saw it as noble, a step toward honesty. Others viewed it as reckless, a crack in the armor of mystique that protected the monarchy for centuries. And yet, Charles had anticipated the reaction. His signature below the order was accompanied by a handwritten note, just 8 words: "A crown that hides will never stand tall." It was a sentence that would haunt and inspire those within Buckingham Palace for weeks to come. As the order circulated behind locked doors, its implications became unavoidable. The king had not simply adjusted protocol, he had rewritten the rhythm of royal life itself. And in doing so, he had opened a quiet storm. Inside Buckingham Palace, silence is often the first sign of conflict. The final order was not met with shouting or visible defiance. Instead, there were long pauses, careful glances, and the unmistakable chill that fills a room when words are being weighed too carefully. Prince William, the reluctant heir, becomes the symbol of continuity. When the king's order reached the Prince of Wales, sources say he read it twice, then folded the document without comment. Those who know him best describe William as torn between two duties: the personal loyalty of a son and the public responsibility of an heir. He understood what the order meant. His father was asking him to begin the transition now, to shoulder the ceremonial burden of kingship while Charles was still alive. It was both an honor and a quiet heartbreak. William had hoped for years of guidance under his father's reign, not an early summons to take his place. Behind palace doors, William was said to have shared his thoughts only once. "If this is what he believes is right for the crown, then that must come before what I believe is right for myself." To the outside world, nothing seemed amiss. William continued his engagements, opening schools, visiting charities, shaking hands with veterans, but royal observers noticed something different: a new tone, quieter and more deliberate, as if he were already rehearsing for the role history had just assigned him. Queen Camilla, the defender of the throne. For Queen Camilla, the final order carried a more personal sting. She had spent decades fighting for acceptance, finally crowned beside the man she loved. To see her husband shift power toward his son so soon felt like the ground beneath her throne was shifting once again. According to one confidant, Camilla expressed her unease privately. "It is too soon. The nation has only just learned to see him as king. They still need him." But Charles was unmoved. His tone, though gentle, carried finality. "They will still have me, but they must begin to see beyond me." Camilla, ever pragmatic, accepted his reasoning in public. Yet her silence in the weeks that followed spoke volumes. Her engagements grew fewer, her appearances more formal, her smiles practiced but distant. Some within the press called it loyalty. Others called it surrender. Princess Anne, the voice of steadfast duty. If anyone in the royal family understood the meaning of service without sentiment, it was Princess Anne. The king's sister reportedly received the order with quiet approval, remarking only, "It's about time the system worked ahead of itself for once." Anne had long believed that the monarchy's survival depended on discipline, not emotion. She saw Charles's order not as disruption, but as structure, a rare instance where foresight outweighed tradition. Still, even she expressed concern over one detail: the public transparency clause about the king's health. "The public's trust is earned through action, not confessions," she cautioned. "A sovereign should be seen, not explained." Despite her reservations, Anne became the order's quiet guardian, ensuring that staff followed its instructions with precision. To many within the palace, her calm presence was the glue holding the fractured royal machine together. Harry and Meghan. The silent distance. Though not formally addressed in the final order, its tone left little doubt their chapter within royal service was closed for good. From their California home, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex reportedly learned of the decree through a contact still close to the palace. Harry's response, as reported by a mutual friend, was somber. "It's not a surprise. I just wish it hadn't come with the word final." No public comment was made, and none was expected. But the symbolism was unmistakable. The king had drawn the last line in a long and painful divide. For days, royal aides described the atmosphere inside Buckingham Palace as eerily calm, like the eye of a storm. The order had been accepted, but not yet absorbed. Each royal handled it in their own way. William with quiet duty, Camilla with poised restraint, Anne with disciplined loyalty, and Harry with distant grief. And yet, outside the palace gates, the storm was only beginning. When word of the king's final order reached the public, it was not through an official announcement, but through a single line buried deep in a Sunday newspaper. The article cited a private royal directive signaling an early transfer of ceremonial power. By morning, it was front-page news across Britain. Within hours, broadcasters cut into their regular programming. Royal commentators, constitutional scholars, and former palace aides filled the airwaves. Was the king ill? Was he abdicating in disguise? Or was this the mark of a modern monarch, one unafraid to prepare his kingdom for a future without him? The nation split in two: the loyalists, a wise king preparing the future. For many Britons, especially those who had watched Charles's long journey from prince to king, the decision inspired admiration. They saw a sovereign who understood that strength comes not from holding power, but from handing it over responsibly. "He's doing what his mother never could," said one Londoner interviewed outside Westminster. "He's giving William the tools early. That's not weakness. That's legacy." Editorials in major papers praised his foresight. One wrote, "Charles III has shown that a king's greatest act of service may be knowing when to let go." Royal supporters flooded social media with tributes, portraits of Charles in his military uniform, captions reading, "A king of duty, not ego." Across church congregations and Commonwealth events, his decision was framed as humility, the final proof that he had earned the crown history once doubted he would wear. The critics, a hidden abdication. But not everyone was convinced. To others, the final order felt like the beginning of an end, a carefully disguised abdication done behind closed doors to avoid the public symbolism of surrender. Political voices from the opposition seized the moment, demanding transparency. "If this order transfers duties of the crown, the people deserve clarity," declared one MP. "The monarchy cannot operate in secrecy and still claim to represent the nation." Even within conservative circles, unease grew. Some feared that accelerating William's public role could destabilize the carefully balanced image of continuity that had defined the monarchy since Elizabeth II. Talk shows buzzed with speculation. Was the king unwell? Was Camilla being sidelined? Was this a strategic reshaping or quiet chaos? The people's debate. For ordinary citizens, the conversation became deeply emotional. In pubs and cafes across the country, voices rose over cups of tea and pints of ale. To some, Charles's act was noble, a father preparing his son. To others, it was cowardly, a monarch retreating from duty. A shopkeeper in Manchester summed up the feeling of many. "It's not just about the king. It's about what kind of monarchy we want. One that changes with time or one that dies with tradition." Even outside Britain, the ripple was felt. American and European media interpreted the move as a soft succession, with headlines such as, "Charles III hands the future to William Britain, enters its next chapter," and "A kingdom between two kings." The palace response. Inside Buckingham Palace, the communications team faced a dilemma. Should they clarify the order or let the mystery speak for itself? Ultimately, they chose the latter. The palace released a brief statement. "His Majesty continues to serve the crown with unwavering dedication. The Prince of Wales will, as always, support his father in the execution of royal duties." It was a sentence crafted to say everything and nothing at once. But for the British people, silence was no longer enough. Outside the palace gates, crowds gathered not in protest, but in curiosity. They wanted to see the king, to hear his voice, to know if the rumors were true. When he finally appeared on the balcony days later, waving gently beside Queen Camilla, the crowd erupted in applause. Yet even in that moment of unity, one question hung unspoken. Was this the calm before a new era, or the quiet before a constitutional storm? History will not remember King Charles III for grand wars or sweeping reforms. His reign, brief in years but heavy in symbolism, has been defined instead by restraint, by the quiet power of decisions made not in public squares, but behind polished oak doors. And none more defining than the final order, a monarch of transition, not possession. For decades, Charles lived in the long shadow of an immortal figure, his mother, Queen Elizabeth II. He ascended the throne as a man who had already spent a lifetime preparing for it, inheriting a legacy so vast it seemed untouchable. But Charles never sought to possess the monarchy. He sought to preserve it. Where Elizabeth embodied endurance, Charles embodied transition. He saw the crown not as a symbol to defend at all costs, but as a living institution, one that must adapt, even if that meant rewriting its own rules. By issuing the final order, he proved that a monarch's strength can lie, not in holding power tightly, but in letting it evolve before time forces it to. He reigns for the future, not the past, wrote one historian. His legacy will not be longevity, it will be foresight, a message hidden in the words. The most striking element of the king's decree wasn't the logistics, the redistribution of duties, or the structural changes, but its language. Every word reflected the mind of a man who had wrestled with purpose all his life. Phrases like continuity through transition and a sovereign's duty to transparency revealed a philosophy rarely heard in royal documents. It wasn't about control. It was about clarity. Charles was signaling that monarchy in the 21st century must no longer hide behind myth. It must stand accountable to the people it represents. To him, secrecy was no longer dignity. It was distance. And if the crown wanted to survive the next century, it had to step closer to the people, not stand above them. A family tested by change. The order also exposed a truth that has long lingered in royal life, that duty and family are often incompatible. In choosing what was right for the monarchy, Charles risked wounding those closest to him. For William, it meant the premature weight of leadership. For Camilla, the uneasy reality of a throne that might fade faster than she expected. And for Harry, the confirmation that his father's door was closing, not reopening. But perhaps this was the king's intent, not cruelty, but closure. By drawing clear lines, he spared the next generation the slow erosion of uncertainty that had haunted his own. A nation between two kings. As William quietly steps into a larger public role, the United Kingdom finds itself in a delicate balance. Two kings in motion, one reigning, one rising. It's a scene unseen since the early 20th century, yet it feels oddly modern. Charles's decision blurred the old division between monarch and heir, creating a dual rhythm, experience guiding youth and youth shaping image. Some royal watchers call it a monarchy in rehearsal. Others call it a monarchy reborn. But everyone agrees on one thing: this is not the same institution Britain once knew. The crown's new definition. Through this order, Charles has defined what kingship means in a post-Elizabeth era. Less mystique, more humanity. Less pageantry, more purpose. Less permanence, more preparation. He may never see the full result of his own reforms, but perhaps that was the point. The final order was not about Charles's reign. It was about what would follow it. And in that sense, it was not an act of retreat, but of courage, the courage to plant a tree whose shade he may never sit beneath. There are moments in history when power speaks not through speeches or ceremonies, but through stillness. King Charles's final order was one of those moments, quiet, deliberate, and deeply human. It was the act of a man who understood that the throne he finally claimed was never truly his to keep, only his to prepare for the next. In the days after the order, Buckingham Palace returned to its usual calm. The guards resumed their posts. The daily briefings continued, and the gilded halls echoed once again with the rhythm of duty. But beneath the polished surface, something had changed. The monarchy, that ancient structure built on ritual and restraint, had taken one step closer to the world outside its gates. The British public watched, waiting for signs of reassurance. And though the king appeared in public, waving from carriages and balconies, Many sensed that his mind had already moved beyond ceremony toward legacy. He had given his command. He had shaped his final message. And now, he would let time decide whether he was right. The measure of a monarch, wrote a palace historian, is not how loudly he rules, but how gently he leaves the world ready for what comes next. For some, Charles's order will always remain controversial, too modern, too transparent, too soon. For others, it is the perfect symbol of a reign born not in ambition, but in reflection. A reign that dared to question its own permanence. As the sun sets behind Buckingham Palace, a lone flag flutters above the roof, the royal standard, still raised, still proud. Inside, the king sits at his writing desk, the evening light falling across the same ink that once sealed his final order. He looks out toward the London skyline, a city that has seen monarchs come and go, but never quite like this. For in the twilight of one reign, another begins to rise quietly beside it. He did not end a reign, the narrator concludes. He began a transition, one final act of service, one final order that left a palace uneasy and a nation forever changed.